Welcome to After the Headlines. I'm your host, Solomon Richberg, licensed clinical social worker. Today, we're talking about the story of Terron Evans Jr., a 26-year-old young man who was found unresponsive under suspicious circumstances. The official ruling? Suicide. But as we dig deeper, the facts tells us a different story, and his mother's fight for answers is far from over. This episode is about more than one case. It's about a pattern, about how systems often fail young black men, and about what it means when families are left with grief, questions, and no closure. Terron Evans Jr. wasn't just another statistic. He was a son, a brother, and a friend. Born and raised in Virginia Beach, Terron grew up in a close-knit family where creativity, faith, and resilience were core values. His mother, Jennifer Baxtron, describes him as someone with a gentle spirit and a sharp sense of humor. He was a kind of person who would light up a room and the kind of son who would never end a call without saying, "I love you." Terron was deeply artistic. He expressed himself through music, poetry, and painting. He often shared lyrics with friends and would get lost in sketching or building things with his hands. He loved working on cars, and he had a dream of starting his own custom auto shop. His goal wasn't to just fix cars, but to create a safe space for other young men who were trying to build their lives. He believed in second chances. He was also spiritual, not in a performative way, but in a grounded, private sense. He believed in energy, in purpose, and in the idea that people are here to help one another. He talked about the power of intention, staying connected to the universe, and aligning himself with a higher calling. His mother often said that he had an old soul, the kind of person who thought deeply and felt everything. Terron faced challenges too. Like many black men in America, he struggled with how he was perceived by others. He felt the weight of stereotypes, and he had conversations with his mother about how exhausting it was to be seen as a threat when all he wanted was peace. He had been arrested for a past nonviolent charge and was on probation, but he was doing the work to move forward. He wanted to be known for who he really was, not just his past. Fast forward to 2020, seeking a fresh start and some peace to grow. Terron moved to Potsdam, New York. Potsdam is a quiet college town in the North Country region. It's the kind of place where everyone knows each other, but not everyone welcomes outsiders. And for Terron, a young black man moving into a predominantly white rural area, the transition was not easy. Shortly after moving, he met a woman named Crystal. According to people close to him, the relationship developed quickly. Crystal had ties to local law enforcement, something that Terron mentioned to his mother. He shared that her behavior was unpredictable, sometimes loving, other times volatile. He told Jennifer that he was feeling isolated, that he was being monitored, and that he didn't always feel safe. But he stayed hoping things would improve. He wanted connection. He wanted love. There were times he expressed concern over the power dynamics in the relationship. Crystal's connections to the police made him nervous. He worried about being misunderstood, or worse, accused of doing something he didn't do. Jennifer urged him to come home, to create space and reassess. But like many young adults trying to navigate complicated relationships, Terron wasn't ready to give up just yet. This is the part of the story that many people overlook. He was trying to love, to build, to belong. He was trying to move forward. And that makes what happened next all the more devastating. On January 8th, 2021, everything changed. That morning, Terron Evans Jr. was found unresponsive in the home of his girlfriend, Crystal, the same woman he had expressed concerns about to his mother. The official ruling? Suicide by overdose. According to authorities, Terron had taken a lethal amount of Wellbutrin, an antidepressant. But almost immediately, red flags started waving. When the autopsy was performed, it contradicted that conclusion in critical ways. There were no pills in his stomach, there was no residue in his mouth or throat, no signs of vomiting, which is typical in overdose cases. And then came the most shocking discovery. The psychiatrist who had prescribed Terron the Wellbutrin was physically present at the autopsy. That is not standard protocol. In fact, a treating psychiatrist will never be at an autopsy unless they were under legal or investigatory obligation. This detail alone raised serious ethical questions about the influence and impartiality. Terron's mother wasn't even notified immediately. She received news of her son's death through a delayed and vague phone call, filled with contradictions. She asked questions and the answers didn't line up. The deeper she looked, the more inconsistencies emerged. The 911 call placed that morning has never been made public. Only one body cam video from law enforcement was ever released, and it was heavily redacted. Key moments were blurred out, muted, or simply missing. There is no clear visual timeline of what happened in those critical first moments after first responders arrived. The situation became more suspicious when it came to light that the lead detective on the case retired shortly after the investigation concluded, and that the assistant district attorney resigned on the very day of Terron's death. Two major players both gone within days, or in one case, hours of the case opening. No formal explanation was given. The scene of Terron's death was not secured as one would expect it in high-profile cases. Reports were filed quickly, and there was no second round of witness interviews, no broader investigation within the neighborhood, and no consideration of foul play despite the obvious red flags. Jennifer requested records. She filed formal public information requests, but she was met with silence, denial, or red tape. Some of the documents she did receive were partially redacted or missing timestamps or critical identifiers. To this day, not all files related to her son's death have been handed over. And then came the hardest part, going through his final messages, texts, social media posts, and voicemails that painted a very different picture than the ones investigators claim. Terron had plans. He had mentioned visiting home. He was in contact with friends. He had been talking about restarting school and reconnecting with family. None of it sounded like a man preparing to take his own life. There was no suicide note, no warning signs in the days before, no significant shift in behavior. And yet, the case was labeled closed. This is the moment where grief turns into disbelief, where mourning shifts into suspicion, when a mother sees the writing on the wall, that the full story of her son's death may never be told unless she tells it herself. And that's exactly what Jennifer decided to do. Jennifer Baxtron is not just a grieving mother. She is a force of determination and a voice for the voiceless. In the aftermath of her son's death, Jennifer transformed her grief into activism. She launched a GoFundMe campaign to raise funds for an independent investigation, knowing that the official one had left too many questions unanswered. She created a link tree to keep the public informed, a centralized space where people could access court documents, articles, her public statements, and advocacy tools. She began organizing candlelight visuals and peaceful protests in Terron's name, calling attention to the gaps in the investigation and to the broader systemic failures affecting Black families across the country. Jennifer's background as a former BLM activist gave her the tools, but it was the memory of her son that gave her the drive. She began speaking at community meetings, sharing Terron's story with anyone who would listen. She reached out to independent journalists, advocacy groups, and elected officials. Her message was clear: my son's life matters, and we won't be silenced. But her advocacy came with a cost. She received hateful messages online. She was told to move on. She was accused of trying to profit off tragedy, as if seeking the truth for your child can ever be exploitation. Still, she didn't stop. Jennifer often says, "I'm not fighting for my son. I'm fighting for every mother who's been told their child's life doesn't deserve a second look." Her resilience is more than personal. It's political. It's the kind of strength that builds movements. It's the kind of love that refused to die with the person it lost. Through every speech, every rally, every interview, Jennifer continues to push for something simple and not powerful: answers. Not theories, not assumptions, just the truth. And in doing so, she reminds us that one Black woman's voice, no matter how heavy with grief, can shake the silence of an entire system. When a case like Terron's is closed prematurely, it sends a dangerous message that some lives, some stories don't deserve the full truth. This practice is known as premature case closure. Is when authorities make a ruling without conducting a complete and thorough investigation. Evidence is left unreviewed, leads go cold without follow-up, and families are left carrying the burden of finding answers on their own. In Terron's case, we saw this firsthand. Incomplete records, redacted footage, an autopsy that raised more questions than it answered, and key officials, the lead detective and the assistant DA, stepping down within days of his death. All signs that the case wasn't treated with the gravity it deserved. This kind of closure isn't just about paperwork, it's about silencing. Which brings us to another critical concept: institutional gaslighting. This happens when families like Jennifer are told that they are overreacting, that they're imagining inconsistencies, or that they don't understand how the system works. It's a tactic that shifts the blame and confuses the narrative, turning valid concerns into perceived hysteria. And layered beneath it, all are racialized assumptions. These are unspoken biases that frame Black men like Terron as inherently troubled, dangerous, or disposable. They shaped how authorities interpret a scene, how media tells the story, and how quickly a case is closed. Terron's probation history was quietly used to justify assumptions, as though it erased his humanity or explained away his death. We've seen this playbook before. Look at Kendrick Johnson, whose body was found in a rolled-up gym mat. The case ruled accidental despite glaring contradictions. Or Ray Rivera, whose death was labeled a suicide despite physical evidence that didn't align with that conclusion. These are not one-offs. They are a part of a pattern. These practices just don't fail families. They public trust in the justice system. They force loved ones to fight a system that should be fighting for them. The truth is, a closed case isn't a resolved case. And when we prioritize convenience over accountability, we dishonor the lives we claim to protect. So when Jennifer says, "I'm not going anywhere until I get answers," she's not just speaking for herself. She's speaking for every family that has been forced to scream just to be heard. Terron's case is just not isolated. It's part of a wider pattern in America where Black lives are undervalued by the very systems that are supposed to protect them. When deaths like Terron's are brushed aside with little to no scrutiny, it sends a message that some lives are easier to close the books on than others. This isn't about grief, it's about justice. It's about transparency. It's about fundamental right to have your story told honestly and thoroughly. Families like Jennifer are forced to become investigators, lawyers, publicists, and activists simply to get their questions heard. They fundraise for independent autopsies, they organize their own visuals, they learn legal terminology and FOIA request procedures because the system won't do it for them. This should not be the norm. The bigger picture here is that when we allow systems to close cases without accountability, we perpetuate a cycle that disproportionately harms Black families, it erodes public trust, it deepens generational trauma, and silences voices that should be at the center of the conversation. So what can we do? We could demand independent reviews of suspicious deaths. We can support organizations that help families investigate systemic failures. We can hold media accountable for covering these stories with the urgency they deserve. And we can refuse to let silence win. Terron's life matters, his future matters, and so does the truth. Thank you for listening to After the Headlines. If Terron's story moved you, don't let it stop here. Share this episode. Follow Jennifer's advocacy. Support stories like this by subscribing to the podcast and joining our Patreon. And most of all, honor Terron by refusing to look away. Until next time, stay informed, stay compassionate, and never stop asking questions. To continue this conversation, join us live on TikTok with Jennifer Baxtron, Thursday, May 22nd at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. She'll be speaking directly about her fight for justice, the evidence, and what comes next. You won't want to miss it. See you then.